Okay, we've made it to question 4. What does the reserve fund pay for?
Repair and maintenance for the assets we own. And I believe, if some correct me, it's if they're over $5,000 and a 3-year life.
If I could add just a slight amount to that, there was a recent reserve study standards put out last year, 2023. It pretty much flows on that same line. It must be an asset that the HOA is responsible for, 1. 2, it must have a predictable life. That excludes buildings. I mean, you do parts of buildings, roofs, windows, doors, that kind of thing. But in terms of the building, that's covered by insurance, not by the reserves, the main structure of it. And the third is you have to be able to estimate the remaining useful life. Those are the only requirements for something to be a component in a reserve study. I know people think there are others, but that's it, based on the National Reserve Study Standards.
Rhett, to follow on that, and we didn't talk about it when the roads thing was up, but one of the things the reserve study does not, the reserve fund does not cover is things like sinkholes. That's not a reserve fund item. Maintenance items on our roads are covered in the reserve fund. But if there's a issue with the road, and we've obviously had some issues, those basically, I guess, come out of ops or somewhere.
It comes out of ops. There is repair and crack seal.
Right.
It's in the operating budget.
Right.
That's what Walter talked about earlier. But the seal coat, the things that are built to extend the life of the roads are generally what are covered in the reserve study.
That's right.
Things that are just fixing it and keeping it so it's useful are more the operating. But Walter may have a different way of putting that.
Let me ask you another question while I'm on this hot topic. If you have an air conditioner on the roof, and we have 80 of them, I think. If you have an air conditioner on the roof and it is a 13 SEER efficiency air conditioner, and now that air conditioner after 15 years is ready to go out, and we're going to put in a 16 SEER because that's the latest standard, that's what things go on. It's not replacing the 13 like for like. So that is acceptable, I believe, in the reserve planning, that you can take current standards on the replacement items. You don't have to go hunt in a garage somewhere to find something that's 15 years old to replace the what you had that is 15 years old. Is that correct?
That's my understanding of how it works. There is another document that I'm not able to quote. It's in here. I could get it if people are interested. But it does talk about what I will call modest improvements when you buy something new. I mean, if you can buy a higher SEER air conditioner, you're going to get more efficiency out of it. That's going to lower your operating costs. Of course you should do that. And if you have, say, two covers over a swimming pool, and you decide you really need a third, that's another example where you could do it. You already own swimming pool covers, you're just kind of extending the size of it. Think golf course. And there are lots of, they don't talk about golf course in that particular document. I'll be glad to provide both of those documents. Just email me and I can send them to you. They're on, if you Google them, you can find them and pull them down. But that's the way generally people are doing it. And as I say, in many cases, there's standards. The other document is giving some insight as to how you interpret some of the standards.
So can I correct something? If I believe when we do have these failures on roads and stuff like that, I believe I do go back to the reserve to get that money. because we already own those roads, they fail, so I do go back and ask for money from the reserves to cover that road that failed.
Okay, good. Thanks, Walter, for clarifying that. I wasn't aware.
This book talks about the natural evolution of assets. That's the conversation that we're having. And any guesses on who made me read this book? Okay. We've got 598 components in our reserve study. And we own those components. They have a useful life of 3 years or more, and they have a value of $5,000 or more. That's not quite this definition. Oh, and the remaining useful life is also articulated. The life expectancy, remaining useful life, are articulated in our reserve studies.
Those are really our capital expenditure limits in the HOA that are set by the board policy on capital spending. Most of the spending that we do in the reserves are capital expenditures. There are some that are just normal expenses from an accounting point of view. I'm not an accountant, so please don't ask me to explain it. But they distinguish between those, partially because you can depreciate capital assets and you don't depreciate just regular, go down and buy a pencil kind of thing. So that's the $5,000 in three years are what are used for capital equipment. And so when we catalog what we've spent in the reserves, then that's what Terry follows in terms of putting it on his books.
Actually,
Right.
the $5,000 limit can also be applied as an aggregate to a group of items. For example, all the chairs in a room. In the case of IT, there's a lot of mixed equipment. It's not any one item. It may consist of switches, access points, and probably a half a dozen other items that get lumped into that category. And some of those are significantly less than $5,000, but you've got an aggregate number that well exceeds that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, like in grocery stores, the carts are only a couple $100 a piece, but they capitalize them because they buy them in groups of 200 or 300.
Sometimes they even get them all out of the parking lot, right? Anything else you want me to add to this chart? So the next question, what should the corporation consider when funding reserve fund requirements?
That's basically the point of the reserve study that we do, is to hopefully pick up everything that we need to fund. And the dollar amounts are only increased by 3%, which we all know is, a bogus number. And we need to actually step back and look at that and say, okay, how much should we be increasing some of these things? So we look at what the actual invoices are that come in, and we give that to the reserve people when they come to do the reserve study. So what the most recent invoice is, we give that to them. And that's what they start, that's where we need to start looking, all right? So it gives us encapsulates everything that we're going to have to pay for over the next year or so. And that's when we sit down, Walter and I and the group sit down, and we decide, what can be pushed, what has to stay, what has to be done right away, and we kind of look at it that way. So that's where we come up with our numbers.
Yeah, so Mark, you're going to articulate the process, because we're right in the middle of it.
Yeah,
This ain't
so
hard.
the reserve study, as Terry said, it's a document that helps you make sure you don't forget about anything you own, and it projects out an estimated cost based on history. In the case of the 2023 reserve study, those costs were basically 2021 costs. And so it gets kind of dated towards the very end. But what it is a source for you to at least remind you of the things you need to look at. As far as how the decision's made, we're just going through that now. The staff goes through and looks at all of those different assets and evaluates their condition based on what the case is. There's a lot of things that are pushed out. Sometimes there's things that are brought in because they're in worse condition. Again, you got to remember the reserve study in most cases is a national estimate. I'll guarantee you that an air conditioner that works down here doesn't work as hard as an air conditioner in northern Minnesota. And so what we find is it's just a guess, a best estimate, professional estimate on when something has to be replaced. But for us to make a decision, we actually look at every asset and make an evaluation, sometimes with contractors or consultants, whatever. And then that's what actually drives the budget. And we just had the meeting where the staff came in and gave their proposals for what they felt they needed for reserves. And it's all about, okay, this truck's got 220,000 miles on it and it's falling apart. Whether it is, needs to be replaced earlier than what its lifespan was or way later. We have a lot of our vehicles, we keep way beyond what the reserve study life estimate is. So anyway, that's kind of the process that we go through. So it's a lot of work, and it's only done to really spend the money where we really need to spend the money, and that's the most important thing, to be frugal. So
Mark, thanks. If I could try to say in 3 bullets what you just said. We took last year's budget document, we took all the 2025 reserve requirements, we put them on a piece of paper. The staff then went through and evaluated each one of those items. They came back to us, and you facilitated a meeting, and they told us what projects could be pushed to the right, did not need to be executed in 2025, which ones needed to be done in 2025. Good so far? They also told you about things that needed to be pulled back to the left, things that may have been scheduled for 2026 or further out, but need attention now because of their condition. Yep. Have I got that right? So right now, what you've had the board working on was looking at everything the staff told you, and we're going through and making our evaluation on whether we support or not support the recommendations we got from the Finance Committee. So the staff did a process. The Finance Committee went through what the staff provided to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee provided their advice to us, and now we're reviewing that advice. I got all that right? You did. Okay. That's the way we've done it every year, is it not?
It is.
Okay. I just wanted to walk through that so my wife understood precisely what we're doing and why I spend all those times looking at those spreadsheets.
But you don't want to exhaust the money you have in the reserve fund at the end of every year. You want a little bit of a cushion. And it's been our process to try and get $2 million cushion, as I recall, at a minimum at the end of the year.
$3 million, actually. Yeah, we have used the threshold type of approach for funding, and so we have set, and it's escalated every year with inflation, but we've set approximately a $3 million, I'd say, minimum balance that we work to keep above. It's decided by the board from a safety standpoint, no different than, at your home. If you have a savings account, if you've got no money in your savings account, that's probably not a real good financial plan for you in case your air conditioner goes out or that type of thing. So again, normally we don't have to dip into it, but it's there for an emergency for the corporation. Any good corporation has that type of fund. So it's just good corporate management. So that's kind of what we have right now. And then when we do the budget, of course, then we have to decide how much do we need to put in based on our expenditures. So.
Okay, I tried to sum up all this stuff for Matt a little bit. I think validating accuracy of the reserve fund is really what all of this discussion is about. How accurate is that plan for that year, and how much is that year, how much can be pushed, and what needs to be pulled. So a lot of work goes into that. So
Mark, something bouncing around in my head here. What do we do when Bill says, we don't need to do this in 25, let's push it to 26? So that cost then gets shifted from 25 to 26. How do we keep track of that?
Well, on the reserve.
Mike?
What we're doing now, and Duff is the one that's been working on it, is one of the things I implemented was instead of doing a reserve study every 3 years, which gets very outdated and is done by another company, we've taken that, and I've asked Duff to do it, and he's been working hard on it, is to make the reserve study a living document so that we actually update it every year. And that's exactly what happens. So what'll happen is some of these things that we've pushed out, they don't go away. We simply have said that we can wait another year, maybe another 2 years for it, so we push it to the appropriate year, no different than when we pull something in. And we've got a couple things this year that, based on the condition, it's been recommended that we need to pull it in because we can't wait another year on it. So that's just the process that happens. So.
One of the other things is when something's pulled or pushed, if it's scheduled for, say, $1,000 in 2025, we push it to 2026, we inflate it by the 3% for the 2026 number. Same thing if we pull it back in. Those numbers are still estimates. The real price we find out when we actually get a purchase order.
I think another aspect in this discussion of how we keep things in the year of pushing, pulling, is that we assess the risk of failure. If one air conditioner goes out, we're okay. It may take a few weeks to get one. But if one of the stations goes out, you could lose your golf course. Simply think about what the weather's been like up until it started raining. It's been brutally hot. You don't get water on that grass, it's gone in a very short period of time. So that's another factor that we put into the process.
That adds some clarification to the evaluate assess process. I got it. Anything else? Awesome. Are there any other questions that I should ask and we should answer about the reserve fund? Have we kicked it hard enough? Hearing nothing, we'll move on. So we've now arrived at CIF, Community Improvement Fee, and the Capital Improvement Fund experience. And I wanted to share this with you because it came up in the meeting this morning. If there's anything that has to confuse our residents, it would be the CIF conversation. And so what I depicted up here for you, this is the net community improvement fee. So if you're a resident in Unit 49 and you build a house up in the preserve, and when you sell your house down here, in that process you pay the community money, and you go up there, we pay that back to you. And so the net is we backed out all the money that we gave back to our residents. And so you can see some years we've sold more resold more houses than other years. Our biggest resale year was 2021. And last year was one of our weakest. We only had 158 homes resale. We're already up to 125 this year. And so 125 plus 13. We got 13 sales so far this month. So we're gonna be in a, I think this will be a typical year for us. If you average this all out, this is 198 houses a year. So this is what I found interesting because I don't know the history. And I'm looking for the history in this room, and I think Pat started to articulate it. But over the years, the boards used 25, 25, 5, 25, 50, and 50 in allocating community improvement fees to the reserve fund. And then the rest of it went into the capital improvement fund. And so it got split. If 25 goes there, 75 goes there. If 5 goes there, 95 goes there. If 50 goes there, 50 goes there. Pretty simple. And so I figured out what we allocated to the reserve fund every year and what we allocated to the capital improvement fund. We've collected to date net $3.2 million. $800,000 plus has gone into the reserve fund, and $2.4 million has gone into the capital improvement fund. Messed up myself. This stuff all runs together after a while. But that gives you some idea of how the community improvement fee has been used as a tool by the board to allocate resources into the reserve fund, and then the remainder going into the capital improvement fund. So, all this led me to some questions. And so, for all the good folks at home, I think everybody here will pass this quiz. But question 6, how are the community improvement fees generated?
Selling their houses. Reselling houses.
You got talking to the mic because the people at home want to hear you.
Yeah, they're funded by resales of homes from people that are coming from outside the community. If someone lives in the community and buys a different home inside the community, that fee is credited back to them. So it's for new people that are moving here that buy a home. It's 1 year of dues, whatever that dues is for that year. So this should be $3,500. So that's really the source, the complete source of the CIF.
That's the only way I know.
There have been a couple of other additions to the CIF, to the Capital Improvement Fund. That happened when we started to get Comcast put into the HOA. The HOA got some fees from that, and all of those funds went into the Capital Improvement Fund. It was around $400,000.
And then also their expense came out of that too for the consultant. So it was a net amount that went in.
Yeah, we haven't got
That
the
was the net.
capital improvement fund yet.
Okay.
That's coming. We're still on the community improvement fee. Did we answer that question? Yeah. Okay. I thought I could pass that one. The board allocates the community improvement fee on an annual basis into what funds?
The reserves is where it goes.
What's that?
The reserves.
Reserve and?
Yeah.
Capital improvement
Yep.
fund.
Yeah, the fee goes into the fund, and then, whether you're right, but then a percentage of it is decided every year as to what goes in reserves.
I can't make the test any easier. I gave you the answer before I asked the question. Okay, thank you. Why did the community implement a community improvement fee to fund the capital improvement fund? This was done in 2016. Let Brother Bill.
Everybody else does it.
Back then, it was an opportunity to generate some funds for Saddlebrook. And back then, all the realtors in the area told us that many communities were doing this, and we'd be wise to do the same thing. So it was really developed and implemented and voted upon by the residents because it's in the CC&Rs as a way to generate additional funds for Saddlebrook.
For what purpose for the funds?
Either for improvement, capital improvements or reserves.
Okay. You were heading in the right direction. I was trying to pull that out of you. But we had no mechanism to fund a capital improvement fund before the implementation of the community improvement fee?
It would had to come out of other sources of revenue. Operations, as an example, yes.
Well, isn't it true that HOA 1 had a capital improvement fee for a long time?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that was a good thing to follow.
We have been at 100% of the assessments since 2016, correct?
Correct.
So I think the board needs to some point in time look at increasing that from 100% to maybe 150% of the assessment.
You can't. Per the CC&Rs, it says the fund can be reduced, but it cannot be increased over the then in place dues, specifically in the CCNRs.
But can't you change the CCNRs?
Yes.
Good luck.
I think you're wrong on that. This came up. I was kind of surprised and had to go back and reread it. There is a clause in there. It says it cannot be increased without a vote of the membership. And that, well, that's not, doesn't change the CCNRs. That's a membership vote, which means 50% of the vote of whoever votes, as opposed to a CCNR, which requires 50% of the number of homes. Read it. Ann Robeson. Yeah.
I'll have to look at it.
Yeah, it just came up, so
He's right.
I have the CCNRs.
The board can lower it. You're absolutely right. Has the authority to lower it. The only way it can raise it is to go back to the community with a vote, just like you implemented it. And the way you changed the CCNRs to put it in place, the same process would be to do what Chuck is suggesting. How does the corporation fund the capital improvement fund?
Capital improvement fee.
Earned interest. Well, somehow, Rhett, if you're suggesting, and I'm not questioning it, that the Comcast money went into capital improvement fund, right? So that was a board decision, I assume?
It was a board decision. Each year, the amount of the capital improvement fee that goes into the reserves is also a board decision and is voted on along with the budget.
Yeah, the question is, how did the board come to the logic train to put that money? Help me connect us from our governing documents. The board made the decision and says, I'm going to take this $400,000 and dump it into capital improvement fund. How did we get to that logic train?
Well, you're stretching my memory a little bit, but I think what I remember was at the time we figured this was, it was a one-time event. The place that didn't have much money that we really needed it was a place where we could do things for the community that you cannot do in the reserves and you don't normally do in the operating budget. So we felt that the Capital Improvement Fund was the ideal place because then we could use it for things for the HOA. One of the things that we used it for early on was the ultraviolet germicidal, I forget what the E, anyway, the UV lights we put into the air conditioning ducts to kill infectious bugs and stuff like that. So that took up almost one of the years of the donation we got from Comcast.
So I guess I'm trying to push to here is board decision.
That was a board decision. It was done on an open vote.
I'm back to.
You're talking about the amount that goes to the reserves now.
Nope.
No.
How does the corporation fund the capital improvement fund? We use Comcast money predicated on a board decision.
That's correct.
So the board can decide to do whatever thing Dan dreams up for the future where we get money from somebody. We can vote to put it in there.
The board has to figure out where the money is going to go. I mean, it's not just going to sit in its own bank account. And so the board has, as the agency that basically has the overall financial responsibility, the board can decide where it can go.
Okay, so
You often do that in a meeting, but yeah.
So let me help
Who
you
else would?
with what I'm rolling around on my pea brain here. ERTC. That money ended up in the operations fund, right? What I'm suggesting here is we could have just as easily moved it over here.
I would assume so. I don't see why not. I don't know what all the conditions on the ERTC were. If you go back to the Triple P loan, Paycheck Protection Program, that was to cover funds that we had spent for staff. So it had to go into the operating fund. I don't know that there was any discussion of where it would go when the loan was forgiven. That's where it went.
That's the same situation with the ERTC, because that money was employee retention tax credit, and it was basically for COVID issues that, you know, we had to pay employees and such, so that's why it went back into operations.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Would you like me to read the clause on the CIF fund? Upon the effective date of this section, the community improvement fee shall be an amount equal to the annual assessment in effect at the time of the conveyance of the lot at issue. For each calendar year thereafter, the board in its sole discretion may change the community improvement fee to an amount that is equal to or less than the applicable annual assessment, but under no circumstances may the board increase the community improvement fee to an amount higher than the annual assessment that is then in effect without the affirmative vote of a majority of the votes cast in person or by proxy at an annual meeting of the members of association or at a special meeting called for that purpose after proper notice to the members.
Yeah, what he said. Which is remarkably like we already knew. Okay. I won't get into any more discussions about the one-offs, but I'm just trying to get a little bit of the foundation of the history for all of us. Why does the corporation annually allocate community improvement fee revenues to the reserve fund and the capital improvement fund? Is that the way it was originally set up, Bill?
Yep.
It was set up to do it that way.
Yep. And the board votes on it every year.
What set it up that way?
The developer.
Okay.
Seriously.
Did we ever, okay, so, hey, Bill, 10 years from now, somebody's going to stand up here and ask this question. We never put this in writing, this process that we utilize?
It's in the CC&Rs.
Well, I'm trying to remember. Not
The CC&R, by the way, the CC&R amendment that was made was for the community improvement fee. It made the statement in there that the board decides how much of that money goes to the reserves and how much of it goes into the HOA capital improvement fund. Did you have a capital improvement fund at that time? So that's what kick-started it. Now, Matt, are you getting into how the board came to the initial decisions on how much to put into the reserves?
I'm coming to the decision tree, the point, the genesis, if you will, of the fact that we were doing that. And so obviously it was the intent of the original initiative to do that. My question was, did we write that down someplace? And what you just told me was the CC&Rs are the right. I just didn't have that stick in my head when I read it.
One other point that might be made is this was done with certainly Robeson's approval, and it was done when the board was controlled by Robeson. This was prior to transition.
One last thing, something to remember is that's really been, that capital improvement fund has been really a very useful thing. I looked at the budgets, which isn't the same as what we ended up spending, but at least it's something that was easy to find. The last 5 years, there's been about $1.8 million that were budgeted out of the capital improvement fund. And so it's not a small amount of money every year. Now, the biggest year was $700,000. A good example, that $280,000 that we put towards the pickleball fees, if there was nothing in the fund, HOA wouldn't have had any funds to put that towards it. So
Put towards what?
the pickleball courts, the $280,000, that was one fairly large chunk out of that $1.8 million, but it's spread all over energy improvement, all sorts of things. So it's, you know, I think sometimes the perception is that we don't really use much of the CIF fund, and the reality is that actually it's been used pretty regularly every year for things that have aided the community in all sorts of different areas. So I just want to make the point.
Isn't this where we have a $300,000 limit, the board goal to spend out of that account? No? No. That's operations. Capital. Back to that.
Matt, one other point is that HOA 2 was the first Robeson-controlled community that was allowed to put in a capital improvement fund, and obviously now every community has it.
Yeah, and it's for Robeson's standpoint, they would want it in there because it makes their new homes less expensive.
Are there any other questions we need to tackle about the community improvement fee or the capital improvement fund?
Just to comment, if I could, when we purchased through lease the solar system on the Arts and Crafts building, that money came out of the CIF, and we're looking at, in the next year, is set for the buyout of the lease. So that will come out, I think it's $75,000.
70,000.
Yeah.
70,000.
Yeah. So that's one of the big things, that we cut electrical costs because we did that, and it will keep on doing it, so.
Mark, that's in the budget. Cool. Thanks. No other questions we need to weigh and consider?
Matt, real quick, and Mark, you, I think, touched on this. Someone just mentioned it and reminded me, we focused on a capital improvement fund. It is not the only place that the HOA buys equipment and capitalizes it, or buys stuff and capitalizes it. We do it out of the operations fund as well, every year. And that's where I think typically we've tried to cap that amount at about $300,000 per year. So we try to stay in some reasonable shape. Mark, define those two: capital improvement fund capitalized items and also operations capitalized items.
Well, you know, and I'm an engineer, I'm not an accountant, so one of those is an accounting question. You know, capitalizing an investment is an accounting term, as how you capitalize it, then you can depreciate it and things like that. So it's an accounting process, you know, as opposed to, for instance, if you buy something with a capital lease, that usually means that at the end of the lease you can buy it for $1.
Okay,
so that term, there's a lot of loose terms when it comes to capital.
I don't need an accounting lesson. What I was trying to get to is the capital improvement funds are typically used for items or things that improve the lifestyle we live here. That's what they're really intended to try to come from. The capital ops items tend to be things that improve efficiency for staff, things that are used to maintain, that can be an improvement, those kinds of issues. Does that make sense to you?
That is the way the fund policy, the capital improvement fund policy is written. You know, it's a matter of interpretation and opinion, of course, whether something is a benefit to the community or something that benefits operations. Ultimately, everything benefits the community, ultimately. But that is the way it's written, and it's really a matter of judgment every year. There are no steadfast ways to determine which way something could go. It's each board decides which bucket it comes out of, so to speak.
Okay, thanks. A good example of the capital expenditures, when we got the golf course, we got it with decrepit equipment. Robeson took the best equipment to his other courses. A lot of equipment was purchased at that point because we needed it, and it was done out of operating capital expenditures. There have been other examples of that. There have also been some examples of things that maybe you could say that's in the same category that have been financed out of CIF, as Mark said. It is a lot of gray area in there.
Thanks. I'm going to move on. We've got some more ground to cover. This chart is for our members at home. This is a one-page chart. This whole conversation we've been through, the operating fund, reserve fund, community improvement fee, capital improvement fund, all summarized on one sheet. So let's talk a little bit about, and I need you to start thinking with me now about how we take strategies to our members. If I learned anything, don't come up with a plan. Socialize thinking with the community. And so that's what we're going to do as we go through this, the piece of this that Larry's going to address here in a minute, which again is the long pole in the problem set that we have to solve here. And so I want to walk through these strategies, but I want you to be thinking about how we do this and then how we convey this to our residents. That there are multiple ways to get to the finish line, and ultimately seek their feedback on what it is that they think is right or reasonable, and then we can go from there in the decision-making process. And so the book that Rhett makes me read from, it lays out 4 strategies, and I threw in the 5th one because that's what the RRAG came up with in option 1 that we presented back in January, and that was using all of this. One way to get through the next 10 years and meet all requirements is to have regular budgeted contributions, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Or you can pass a special assessment for part or all of the cost of the project. In 2019, when the 2020 budget was approved, it was envisioned that we were going to do Mountain View Golf Course 9 holes at a time, and the only thing that we were going to take a loan for was the irrigation system. Fast forward, decisions changed. We did the course all at one time, and we took the loan for the entire project. I will admit, cost escalated considerably from planning in 2019 to execution in 2023. The third option is securing a loan. Or you can defer the replacement until a later time when everything becomes more costlier for the residents. And as I mentioned, the book didn't talk about this combination, but it was articulated to us and we presented it to the community. So you can use all of this to deal with a problem set or a renovation of like a golf course. So regular budgeted contributions. When I go back to our missteps with option 3, we threw options 1 and 2 in there as fallback positions for the board. Wasn't well received in the community, prudent planning and thinking on behalf of people trying to advise board members in making decisions. In this case, you were talking about increases in POA with the objective of, as I recall, keeping our POA as low as possible and meeting the requirements. And this seems to be a difficult construct to communicate effectively to residents. And that's what I need you all to put your brains on and help us with, is how do we do this so we understand that we're trying to minimize pressure on increases in POA, but we still have to pay the bills. And so, of course, you all came up with, the RRAG came up with the idea of $300 assessments to eat a piece of this 1 year at a time over the next 5 years. So that's what I mean by regular budgeted contributions and examples that you've already had in front of you. Everybody with me? So the book says if we have to pass a special assessment or if we have to take a loan, it's because we didn't do prudent planning with strategy 1. I want you to think about that for a second. So if we don't do the kind of thinking that strategy 1 requires, then you're really down to strategy 2 and 3. which quite frankly is where the boards found themselves in dealing with Mountain View. I want to take the lessons we've learned about the last 6 years, and I want to turn that into knowledge for our residents and apply that to the problem set of the next 5 years. Because at the end of the day, what's in front of us, if we don't execute a strategy 1, is a combination or a strategy 2 and a strategy 3. I want to effectively communicate that as we go through this process before we get to finalizing plans. The third strategy is secure a loan. I don't know about anybody in the room, but there's a lot of anger about the board being able to take out loans. And there are folks that are just dang not happy that the board could do that. And so if you don't want a loan, and that makes you unhappy, and you don't want a large special assessment, and that makes you unhappy, how do we communicate to get people to understand we got to do something?
Matt, we were talking about, and as Duff pointed out so eloquently, that we could increase the CIF by a majority vote. And we're putting part of the CIF into the reserve fund. So why couldn't that be another strategy?
Okay, we'll get into see, you're in detail now. I'm at the strategy level, and you're getting down into the tactics, right? The tactics are how we're going to flow the money in, okay? And so what you're talking about is we'll use the community improvement fee is one of the funding mechanisms to solve the problem.
Correct.
Larry agrees with that. There are lots of people that agree with that thinking, right? But that doesn't solve the whole problem. See, we got to do everything for the community, not just the golf course. Okay? We got to do all, remember the Mountain View chart, the preserve chart, the Desert View chart, all those other expenses in there, the roads, all those have to be addressed in the plan as well. I have no objection to the idea of looking at the community improvement fee as a funding mechanism. If we were to get $600,000 for 5 years, that's $3 million. Right? We still got to fill in the rest of the gaps. Are we going to do it? And I don't expect you to have answers. I'm throwing this out because the challenge is we failed miserably. If we can all agree that the facts that were presented to the community in January, February, and March were the truth, were accurate, all right, we solved a piece of that problem by eliminating the Mountain View loan. The rest of the problem set still remains. And so the question is, all the things that we have to do, meet the increases in the operating fund, pay all the other bills in the reserve fund, how do we put this all together? That's why we call it integrated financial plan, because we got to do all these things. And so I'm with you, and I support that. I support Larry's thinking on that subject. All right, those are levers that are available to be pulled to help solve the problem, but they're not going to solve the rest of the problem. It's just a piece of it.
Matt, relating to the loan, I agree that the majority of residents probably did not want it, but most of the anger came from passing the loan without the approval of the residents. If you would have put it out for a vote, I think, and it would have got approved, you wouldn't have had that much anger. But they were upset because you went out and did it without getting approval of them. And I know we don't need to get approval from them.
You see how he keeps saying you? I didn't take that damn loan. Okay, I know I'm supposed to be the target, but the truth is, the board operated within the authorities granted to it. And there are people in the community that resent that. They resent the authorities that are granted to the board. And there are some that are even motivated to change it. However, the board operated within the authorities that were available to it. And so if you're telling me the only thing they were upset about was the fact that they didn't vote on it, then you're saying a loan is a strategy that's going to be embraced by our residents?
No, I didn't say that was the only thing they were upset about. I said that was the primary one because they didn't vote on it. But there's an old saying out there, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because the board has the authority to do the loan doesn't mean they should do it without consulting the residents.
I think there's some blame to go both to the board and to the residents, because that loan was talked about for a significant period of time. There were several board meetings when it was discussed. There was no blowback at the time that was being discussed. The blowback came with a special assessment. It did not come because of the loan. Nobody said boo about it then. So there is some, maybe the board was a little too comfortable with it, but they were comfortable with it in part because of the lack of any reaction from the membership.
That loan was discussed for about 2.5, 3 years. I know because I'm the one that did most of the presentations on it. I could have been a target. I don't think I got a single nasty email or phone call or someone coming up to me in a meeting saying, "What the hell are you doing?" So I think the problems that we had earlier this year, yeah, people were upset with the loan. Some people, but that was our experience. The other part of that is the responsibility that the board has to take care of our assets. We did not have the time to build up the reserve fund by any other means. We inherited the golf course, we bought the golf courses on 1/1/2018. There had basically been no money put aside in the reserves with the idea that we were going to own the golf courses. And we're facing something about 4 or 5 years down the road. And in 2019, we had the first pump blow. And then in 2020, we replaced the second one. Now, suppose we'd gone out on a loan and on a vote for a loan, and the homeowners turned it down. What would have happened then? I don't remember a lot of discussions about it, but as I look back now, if they'd turned it down and the board had then gone ahead and done a loan, we'd have probably been lynched. So, in any case, going ahead, I don't think anybody wants to do a loan. I think we've got plans that have been shown in many environments, and those will continue to grow in fidelity. But as Matt said, in trying to include all the things that are possible, it certainly belongs on the list.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think the loan itself was that much of an issue when it was presented as an option. I think it blew up when they found out it was over 10% interest. That's the thing that can get most people upset about it.
Yeah, the board was also very fortunate that God gave them the largest inflation year in 40 years. And there's what happens when you don't control your future because you don't plan. Then it's up to luck. And it's really, I'll tell you something, and this is off the topic. Monday morning quarterbacking is always a great thing. Everybody looks really smart when you look backwards. You need to be able to reflect and learn lessons. And the lessons we as a community need to take away from is you can't put the board in that position. You've got to demand that the board doesn't put itself in that position or future boards in that position. And so we've been through all this now. We've got all this angst and all this pain that we've endured. We're on the backside of it. How do we take the lessons that we've learned and we move to the future in a productive way where we have a dialogue with one another and we can see the way to a better future by working together? Having said that, it's 2:54. Back in your seats at 3, please.